New built-in variables and operators. This is going to be a very short nugget where I'm going to introduce you to three brand new operators in Windows PowerShell version 2, -split, -join, and the Splat operator, and introduce you to three of the new built-in variables that you might find yourself using. $PSUI culture, $PS culture, and $PS version table, which is really useful. Also, kind of in conjunction with PS version table, going to remind you about the requires functionality, which has existed since version 1, but now that we've got two versions of PowerShell out there, actually kind of becomes important. First up is the split operator. This takes a delimited string, really any kind of delimiter, doesn't have to be commas. Let's just say string equals 1, 2, 3, 4. The split operator, result equals string dash split, and then you tell it what your delimiter was, comma in this case, and result is now an array. So I can get to those things individually. Like that. So it's a great way to take some delimited data that maybe you're reading out of a file someplace, or that you've gotten from some other data source, and break it out into an array so you can get to the individual elements. Join does exactly the opposite. If we take that result and we dash join it on a hash sign, the result is a string where every single element in the array has been pieced together using our specified delimiter, in this case a hash sign. Could go back and turn it back into a comma if we wanted to. So those two, split and join, work together. Now you've always kind of had that functionality. If you take any string and pipe it to get member, you'll see that there's a split and split, join goes with an array. So you've always been able to take a string like string, which has our comma separated, and do split on a comma, and you'll get the same result. The dash split and dash join operators really just make this a little bit easier to get to. Now this next operator is a little trickier. Let's take a look at a commandlet like help new AD, not typing, new help new AD user. Now from prior examples and previous nuggets, we've already learned that most of these parameters will accept pipeline input by property value. So that means department, for example. If I can pipe in an object that has a department property, then that property will get hooked up to this parameter because the names match. Well, sometimes you don't always have an object that you can stick in. Sometimes you need to work things a little bit differently. Well, that's where this splat operator, which is one of the other new operators in PowerShell version 2, can come in handy. What you want to do is create a hash table. Now, a hash table is nothing more than an array that contains key value pairs. I typed one in earlier. Here it is. So I'm going to create a hash table. The @ sign in this context is an array operator, and the curly braces tell me that I'm creating a hash table. And then inside here, it's just key equals value, key equals value, key equals value. So I've got three elements in this hash table, three key value pairs, and they're separated by semicolons. Don't mess that one up either. If you put commas in there, I'll show you what happens if you put commas in there. I'll show you what happens if you put commas in here. Just so that you know what the error message looks like. It does that, so no good. Going back to the semicolons, which work great. When I hit this, boom, so now I can type parms and see what's in there. And it's got city, name, department, and all those values. Because these match these parameters, I can now run this command, new AD user, and now rather than saying parms with a $, I'm going to use the @ sign in a different context. Now it's a splat operator. And I know that sounds weird. All it's doing is it's taking the key value pairs and attempting to match them based on the name or the key to one of the parameters in the commandlet. So when I hit enter, I hopefully created a new user called J Hicks. Let's go look in Active Directory users and computers just to do something a little differently. Oh, there he is too. And by default he was created disabled because that's what that parameter does. And if we go into the account, address, his city is Syracuse, and organization, his department's janitorial. So that's the splat operator is kind of a way to bundle up all of the parameters that you want to feed to a commandlet, and then feed them to it in like just one boom, done. So that's a pretty useful little technique too. So that's called the Splat operator. One of the reasons I wanted to make sure I covered that is because there's not a ton of examples in the built-in PowerShell help. If you're looking for more, let me take you to a website that's got some good examples. Let's just search for PowerShell Splat operator. And this is a good website here. So if you can just kind of remember this Bart Desmet bsharp.net blog, this will get you to a decent example, if the thing ever finishes loading, of how to use the Splat operator, just if you ever need a quick reminder beyond what's in this nugget. So it kind of lays it all out, and it gives 2 or 3 different examples and ways you can do it. Oh, he talks about split and join too. Look at that. Great minds think alike. So those are the 3 new operators in Windows PowerShell version 2. Split, join, and splat, which is the @ sign. Don't get confused on the @ sign, because it is used differently in a couple of different places. So the context I showed you is where it's the splat operator as opposed to the array operator or something else. So in addition to those 3 new operators, PowerShell also introduces some new variables, and you can see most of these on your variable drive. And the first 2 I want to look at, let's see, here's one of them, PSUI culture. That's the PowerShell user interface culture. I'm on a US English system, so it's set to ENUS, and you'll also find PS culture, which is ENUS. Now the PS, you'll see a lot of these new variables have PS in front of them for PowerShell, and it's to avoid collisions or conflicts. I will usually put this into my profile script, culture, UI culture equals PSUI culture, just because I always forget to type the PS part. $culture seems to make a lot more sense to me. So now I can just look at culture and I get that. And you saw me use this actually a little bit in one of the earlier nuggets too, nugget number 10, where we talked about the data language and providing internationalization, and that's what those 2 variables are for. They give you access to the culture or the localized version of the operating system. So if you're running on a German operating system, German version of Windows, it would say DE-DE. So that's kind of the way you use those 2 variables. Now the next built-in variable, really useful. This one, for some reason, I can remember the PS. It's a PS version. I spell it right. PS version table. And this is kind of a dump of all the different versions that PowerShell is right now. Now, this didn't exist in version 1, but it will exist going forward. So this is telling me that we're running on version 2 of the .NET framework. That's the CLR version right here. Common Language Runtime, at least version 2 of the runtime. It's telling me that the Windows build is 6.1.7600, so this tells me it's Windows Server 2008 R2. The PS version, PowerShell version, is 2.0. The Web Services for Management, or WinRM version, is 2.0. PS compatible versions. This is kind of a neat one. So although we're running on 2.0, this is telling me that this version of PowerShell is compatible with version 1 and version 2. Now obviously being compatible with itself, version 2, makes total sense. Being compatible with version 1 simply means that this version of the shell shouldn't break anything. Anything that worked in version 1 should still work here. And the PowerShell Remoting Protocol version is 2.1. So here's how you can kind of use these. Grab PS version table, and then a period. Oh man, version table. Then a period, and then whichever you're after. So say PS version. And it actually breaks it down into major, minor, build, and revision. So that's just another property that you can tack on, major 2. Here's how you might use that in a script. You might say something like if PS version table dot PS version dot major is not equal to 2, then write warning. Script designed for V2 will attempt to execute anyway. So you can just sort of stick that at the beginning of the script, and then if you ever find your script running on version 1, it'll say, hey, I was designed for version 2, I'll try and execute anyway, but things might not work out. The way you would use PS compatible versions, see how that's in the curly braces right here? that just means it's a collection. So if I take this and type compatible versions, it just breaks it down into two objects. So I could grab the first one and get its major, which would be 1, or just get all of the first one. And there we go. So you can kind of, build these things up and get to them however you want to, and break all the little pieces down however you like. And it's nice and simple that way. So another way to do basically the same thing, to have your script check to make sure that it's running on a compatible version of PowerShell, is to simply document in the script what version you require. Requires version 2. I could say requires version 2.2 or 2.0 or requires version 1, whatever you want. So there's this whole syntax for the requires. It's documented in help about requires. And it allows you to say requires a particular version of PowerShell. You can also say requires a snap-in, and that means that your script requires that a particular snap-in be loaded, and your script won't execute unless that snap-in is already loaded into the shell. And there are just a couple of rules to keep in mind. The requires statement must be the first item on a line. Now that does not mean it has to be the first line, but it has to be the first item. So you can't do I will requires version 1. That won't work. This has got to be at the beginning of the line. Now that said, it can be on any line you want, and you can have more than one requires statement to document a particular version or a particular snap-in requirement or even a particular shell ID that you require. So that's kind of a more useful, more official way of describing that sort of version requirement. If you need to get more detailed, checking things like the .NET Framework version or the remoting protocol version, then you can start using that PS version table variable. In this nugget, you learned about 3 new operators that have been introduced in PowerShell version 2. You learned about the split and join operators, which take things from delimited lists to arrays and back again, and the splat operator, which lets you construct a hash table that has key value pairs and then feed all of those as parameters and their values to a commandlet. You also learned about 3 new variables that were also introduced in PowerShell version 2, PS UI culture and PS culture. And like I said, just as a tip, I usually create a shorter version of those, UI culture and culture, in my profile when I'm working with those guys. And the $PS version table that lets you access version information about all the various components that make up Windows PowerShell. Now that is one way to document in your script that you need a particular version of PowerShell, but there's also the requires comment. And that's been around since version 1, it's not brand new, but with 2 versions of PowerShell on the table, it's kind of more important to use that. So if you do write a script that requires version 2, make sure you add a comment, #requires version 2, to the top of your script. It'll document it for anybody who comes along later to maintain the script, and it'll help PowerShell enforce that. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.